Hello? Hello? Testing, testing. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? All right. Yeah, what's going on? It's the same one that I use in the morning and it works just fine. Because it's not an evening tech. All right. Let's put this on the side. Let's okay, and this is recording. Okay, it's recording. Good. All right, excellent. Welcome back. Let's see where we are. So I believe this week is all about React Redux. And we get started on the 6th week, and we will be talking about state management. And we'll talk about it both in how to manage state at the component level and at the application level. Right. First at the low level component, how to maintain state, how to mutate state, and then talk about how is that same state can be shared among other components, across components, so that they can talk to one another. Okay. And let's see. Yeah, that is all this week. Next week we will have the first exam. So what we'll do is that we'll have a review early in the week, and then the exam will be available shortly after that, probably midweek. Right, it'll be available for about 3-4 days, in which you can take the exam anytime during that time. Okay. So let's see. That's the plan. This upcoming assignment you can have a little longer to complete, so that it won't be due till at the end of the month, right? So you'll have this week, next week, right? So you have a couple weeks to complete that. It is going to be one of the more challenging assignments, also because Redux in general is a challenging topic. So we'll get a chance to talk about a lot about that, how to maintain state and whatnot. Okay. Let's see. And so when we come back from the exam, right, we'll start talking about server-side programming, right? So all this up until now, what we've been doing is mostly just only front-end development, right? HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React.js, and so we're reaching the limits of what you can do with just the front end. And so next week we'll talk about how we can enhance the application, make it full, right, by adding server-side programming, as well as later on introduce databases, session management, logging in, identifying, and then obviously we'll have the project. All right, before we get started, any questions? Oh yeah, so a few folks might have missed quiz either 2 or 3. So I've made some of those quizzes available. Please take those quizzes as soon as possible, so I can open up the quizzes so folks can give us some feedback on those. Okay. And quiz 4, I'll make it available a little later. Won't be available till maybe midweek. I'm start tweaking it a little bit. Also, considering that all the sections, including my undergrad section, that all the quizzes will be available at the same time, as opposed to for the graduate sections, they're available much earlier than the undergrad section. So I want to make sure that there's some synchronicity there. So more on that on the quiz. All right. So any questions before we get started? All right. Okay. Right. So let's talk about state. So what we mean by state, is that whenever you have an application, we have in the components we have data, right, like variables, arrays, objects, right, and up to this point we've been using those to render the content of the front end. But we haven't been talking about being able to modify or change or mutate that state as the user interacts. Right now it's been pretty static. You load up an array, you iterate over that array, and display some content. Okay. So today we're going to talk about that. Instead of being a constant, right, a hard-coded array of tweets, an array of to-do lists, we like to be able to modify the state of the application as the user interacts with the application. Right, they want to be able to post new tweets. Right, they want to follow somebody. They want to like a tweet. All those things are modifications of the values of the data inside of an application over time. Right, and that data, as it changes over time, is what we refer to as the state of the application. So we'll talk about it first as the state within one component, right? And then we'll talk about how that can go beyond that one component across multiple components and even the entire application. Okay. So let's see where we are. We have a branch, so the A6 branch, and so I'm going to create a new branch. I'll call it branch A7, where we're going to be talking about state and how to manage state in the application. All right, so let's do that. So let's do get branch, get status. I'm going to do git checkout. Let's be the A7. All right, and we already have an A7 directory where we can play around and you can add our exercises in there. So let's talk about state. All right, let's see here. Let's see where we are. Let's do an npm start so that we know what we have. Labs, index. Twitter. Yes, close the app. And we have a couple routes so we can navigate to Labs, Twitter. Right. Labs is the index, so there's the lab. Okay, and these are the various assignments. So we're going to focus today on the assignment 7. Okay. There's a question in the chat. It says, your voice is breaking up a bit. Uh-oh. I was about to say, I thought that was a Wi-Fi issue. Oh, what? Let me see what my speed is. Let's see. Make sure that I don't have an internet issue. Let's see. 300 megabits. That's pretty good. That's not too bad. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the assignment number 7. And so we have we go to labs. We have we worked on assignment number 6 last week. Let's work on assignment number 7. Let's see. So under labs, we create here assignment 7. We create an index. We call it index.js, and this will be our assignment 7 component. Okay. Constant assignment 7, and we'll return something that says this. Say H2 assignment 7. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's export default 7, and then we can load it up in the labs. We'll replace this with assignment 7. With this, I'm going to put it at the top so that we have the assignment 7 right away. There it is, assignment 7. So let's talk about a couple of things, right? We would like to first talk about the state of a component, right? And we'll talk about 2 different types of state. The state at the level of each individual component. We'll expand that a little bit on having maybe 2, 3 components sharing a state. Right? We'll see how we can do that. And then we'll talk about how we maintain the state of an entire application, right? Or a much larger group of components, right? That want to share data amongst themselves. So let's take a look at assignment 7. Let's talk about a component. We'll talk about local state or component state, right? So we'll have it's created directly here. We'll talk about component state. Okay. And so let's create an index there. We'll talk about component state. Okay. So there's going to be const component state. Okay. So say I want to have a maybe just a simple integer. Right? Maybe I have a constant that have maybe a number value that I have maybe 1, 2, 3, right? And I want to render that value. Right? So notice it says that it's a constant, right? And so it's not really state. Well, it is, right? It's a constant state. But the way we think about state is something that changes over time, right? So a constant would not work. So perhaps we would say a let, right? That would allow us to modify over time. And we return the component that says 3 component state, and say you render count, right? So you say maybe count is equal to count, right? Let's export this default component state. Okay, and let's bring that over to our assignment state. Here, component state. Okay. All right, so let's see what we have. Okay, there it is. Count 1, 2, 3, and we would like to be able to modify the state as we interact with it. So maybe component state might have. We'd like to be able to change it, and perhaps as a result of having a couple buttons, right, that one says count up or down, and down. There it is. So we'd like to be able to, as we click up, we're going to change the state of that component, right? Change that value. So how do we do that? Well, there's no particular way that we could do this, right? Perhaps what we could do is a function that we can call that up, that would do what? We would do maybe count up, maybe, right? And there's a const down. It says count minus, something like that, right? And then as you click the buttons, let's say on click, we might want to call this up, right? And this might be on click, we would call down. Let's see, push in the chat. Right. So notice that if we click on it, it's not really working, right? And you might say, well, maybe you did, this was not bound correctly. Right. We go to the console. Let's see. Say maybe the console. Say console log. Print the count. Okay. Let's see what that does. So if we refresh and say up. Notice that the value is indeed changing. See that? So the value is changing. Right, so down. But notice that it's not re-rendering, right? That this is just stays put at 123, right? Nothing is telling the component that, hey, the state has changed. You need to re-render, right, that particular value. Okay? And that is the crux of the problem, right? We need to somehow tell the component that the state has changed and you need to be able to re-render yourself. And so how do we do that? Okay. So the way to do that is as follows. Okay. What we do is that we use what is called a state hook. Right? A hook in React.js is a paradigm. Right? It's an idea of how different features can easily be added to the framework, right, without entirely changing the framework, right? And there are hooks for all sorts of things, right? And in particular, there's a hook for being able to maintain state, right, and notify a component that the state has changed and it's a good time for you to update yourself. Okay, that you should re-render this. So let's use our very first hook. It's called the use state hook. All hooks start with use, and followed by the name of the feature that you want to add. So here, count. What we're going to do is that we're going to create a constant, and this is going to be put in an array like that, which is kind of weird. Right? It's going to say use state. There it is. It's a hook. It's part of the core React library. Okay? And the way it works is that we use state allows you to provide an initial state of whatever state variable that you're declaring. And for instance, we could say that its initial state is that its value is 123. And what use state returns, it returns two things. Well, actually, it returns one thing. It returns an array. It returns an array, and that array, perhaps, and that array, you can then deconstruct. Right, this square brackets on the left side. Right, it's a syntax in the new JavaScript. It's called an array destructor. It says, that array that is coming, I want to unwrap the array, and I want to grab the first element of that array, right? And I want to assign it to the first variable here on the left side. Right? So there's two things that this comes back. It's an array of two elements that comes back, and we are deconstructing that array. Right? And the first element of that array is being bound to the first variable on the left-hand side, or first constant. Okay? Then the second element that in that array that comes comes is a function. So the first one is the variable, and the second one is a function, a mutator function that allows us to modify the state or the value. The new allows us to tell React.js what is the next value of that variable, right? And by the way, letting the component know that the state has changed and that it would be a good idea to re-render itself. Right? The function, typically the names of those functions, you can put in anything you want. It doesn't matter. These names are whatever you want them to be. Right? This could be XYZ. It doesn't matter. It's by position. Right? I'm taking the first element in the array that's coming back, and I'm assigning it to the first element on the array on the left side. And so the names could be anything you want. Right? They can be the same. So typically, you choose a name that means something to you. And then the function typically follows the naming convention as that starts with the keyword set, and then the name of the variable that you're setting. Right. So the naming convention is that you say set and then count. Right. You're modifying the count. Right. So this one is the variable that allows you to read the current value, and set count allows you to set the next value. Right. So this allows you to read the current value. This allows you to set the new value. Make sense? So following this idea, you would say that I want to set. If I wanted to make it up, I would say I would set the count. Right. So that it's whatever the count is plus 1. Right. And if I wanted to subtract it or make it go down, I would say set the count. So it's count minus 1. And setting the new value of the count, right? And these functions, what they'll do is that not only will they change the value of count, but they will also notify the component and say, hey, your state variable has changed. Anywhere that you reference this variable should re-render. Not necessarily the entire component, but anywhere where that value where it's being referenced should be notified that it should render that piece. Okay? So if we go back and notice that now it does change, see that? It goes up and down. Not only is it being modified, but we are notifying the component that it should render and display. Everybody good? That makes sense?
I've seen classes before used in React, and I'm curious if this is just a different syntax or how this approach to using state differs from doing the class approach that extends the component.
Yeah, it's still there. You can still use classes to maintain state. It's somewhat of a legacy way of doing it, and the functional is the preferred way to do it now. But yes, initially it was all maintaining state and set the next state and whatnot. But yeah, that syntax is still there, it's still supported, but it's being abandoned a little bit towards using functional components as opposed to class components.
Got it. Thank you.
It used to be that that if you wanted to change state, then you had to definitely use class components, and that if you had a stateless component, then you could use a function. So one of the limitations of using functional components like I'm doing here was that you could not maintain state, right? That you could not modify state and whatnot, right? It was a limitation. But once hooks came out, that limitation went away. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's take a look at a couple of other examples. So this is a for counter. Counter example. Let's take another example. Let's say I want to be able to maintain. Let's play around with maybe strings. Okay. So, for instance, here I might have perhaps I want to be able to type some data. Right? Maybe it's an email. I have maybe set email. So it's a new variable, state variable called email, and I can initialize it as Alice at Wonderland. And here I might have another example, right, where we might have an email, and I might want to have an input field where I can type that that value. Right? So this input field, I can set the new value or the initial value of that input field to be email. Okay. So notice that there it is. Right? We have this input field whose initial value is indeed alice.com. Now notice that if I try to type edit it, changing the value, it won't let me. I can't remove it. I can't edit it at all. Right? It's forever bound the value to the variable email. So to modify it, again, I need to be able to change the value of the email as I type. Okay. Now we could do it right here on the input field, very much like the on-click. On-click handles click events. As I click on something, and anything can be clickable, not only buttons. Anything can be clicked. Input fields, not only do we have an on-click, everything has an on-click event handler. It also has an on-change. An on-change is called for every single keystroke as the input field wants to be modified as I'm typing. Right? And the input field, every time I type, it wants to change. Right? Oops. I need to provide a function. So the on-change, right? All these event handlers are expecting a function call. Right? And it wants to change every time I type. It really wants to change, but it's forever bound to this value. Nevertheless, as I type, it can notify my function that indeed something happened. Right? So we can maybe provide here a function that can set the value. You can say const change email. Okay. That I can notify, call this change email. Say change email, calling that function. So as I type this, say console log change email. So every time I type, notice that the function gets called. If I type again, right? Notice that it gets called again twice, right? So every time I type, it's being invoked many times, right? Okay. So what do I do? So what I want to be able to do is say, well, I want to set the email to its new value, right, of whatever you type by keystroke. So the way we do that is we can extract the current value of the input field, right, and we want to set the email to be that value. So how do we do that? Well, it turns out that all these functions, up, down, when they are invoked by an event handler like this, it passes an event object to the function. So all these actually take an event object. All these take event objects. Here we didn't do anything with that event. We just ignored it. But here we do want to use it. Right? Let's say, oh, I want to look at what's in that event. Okay. So one of the things that I can extract from that event, right, is the target. Target is the input field. Who generated this event? Right? Was it a button, the input field, a drop down, a text area? Somebody generated. Right? So event.target is bound to the element who generated the event. And then here we have certain values that are particular to that particular element that generated the event. In particular, we have value. Value is the value of that input field. Okay. So we can say that the constant, say new email, is that value that we're retrieving from the target, right? And we can maybe type it here. There's the new email. Let's print it out. Notice that if I type, Notice that I'm typing the Q. See that? It wants to be COMQ, but it's not letting it, right? It's stuck at the email constant. If I type W, still, it doesn't let me continue, right? If I keep typing, right? Notice that W, it just keeps staying there, right? It doesn't change. Okay. So what I can do is actually set it, right? Say set, and say change it, actually change it to the new email. Right? And now we are free to type. Yeah, everybody good? Makes sense? Now the cool thing is that all these variables, right? All these new emails, whatnot, they can be referenced in the user interface wherever we want, right? So for instance, down here, we have a big email on here. Let's say email is equal to. So anywhere it's referenced here in the input field, down here in H1, right? It renders. There's email, see that? So as we change it, we edit it, right? It re-renders the entire component, right, with all its state variables, notifying whichever DOM element is rendering that particular text or value, right? It will add it there. So I can give concatenate here accounts for email and account. So this can go up, right? And as I check the email, I can do whatever I want. Make sense? There's the working. All right, let's move on. Let's try out like a text area, right? I might have maybe I'm writing a bio, set bio. Maybe this is my profile. So this would be I am a Lego enthusiast, and here I make bio. And I might have a text area. And the value is initially bio. This is my bio there. And this pretty much works the same way as before, right? We can change the value of the bio right here as you type. And I can say that same thing. I can say on change. And I can say pass it a function, right? Pass it a function, and maybe call it change bio like we did here, or we could write it right here without leaving the on change the syntax here, right? The expression. And here's the event, and who are we calling? We're calling the set bio, right? We're passing it the events dot target dot value, right? Without leaving the on change. Now this might become a little hard to read, so it's a good idea. It's always a good practice to break it out into multiple lines, right, so that it's makes it easier to read. There it is, right? So fully brackets here so that you follow along. Now it's not a good idea to put a break here inside a text area, because any spaces that you have here, right, are meant as the actual value of that text area. So text area should also always be closed here with no value inside, no spaces inside the body of the text area. Let's see if this works. So Lego enthusiast, EV enthusiast. So Lego EV enthusiast space. Okay. So now I can type it. Make sense? Everybody good? Okay. Yeah. So let's do a couple more. You might have also a Boolean expression. Maybe I'd like to have where I can have a checkbox where I want to show or hide something. Right? Say maybe state, and maybe this is show bio, then set show bio. and it's true first, and then my text checkbox that I can turn on and off. This is maybe type checkbox, right? And the value here, we're going to say value because the checkbox, right? We use checked, whether it's checked or not, and this would be equal to show by. And notice that it's checked because it's initial true. Notice that I cannot uncheck it. See that? So we can handle the change. You can say that if you click on it and it wants to change state, I would like to change the show bio. So I can say that on change. Okay, have a function here that will handle that. The event comes in, and I want to set the show bio. I want to set it to the E, that's target. The target is the checkbox, and whether it's checked, not value. Value is for text or input or in text areas or input fields, things like that, right? But checkboxes and radio buttons, right? You use checked. Checked. I want to set it to whatever the value that it wants to be, and I'll just let it be whatever it wants to be. So now if I go in and check and uncheck, see that? So now I can use that to drive other content. I could say, well, this whole bio thing, maybe I want to show it, maybe I don't want to show it, maybe depending on the show bio. So what I could do, I could grab this whole thing, right, and put it, just group it together into one single element, and then say, well, if it's true, I want to show this. Otherwise, I don't want to show it. Okay. And so that's a Boolean expression. It's like, and when we do that, so we can wrap this whole thing. Right? We could say here's show. That's the variable. It's the variable show variable, and it's not showing. Right? It's a true or false. Just shows as an empty string, whatnot. But what I can do is I can do the following. I can say I can grab this, right, and put this down here, right, and then I can and these two expressions together. I can say I can do show bio and this, right, and the effect that has is that the right hand side of this and expression, this Boolean expression, this will evaluate if the left-hand side is true. If it's false, right, the right-hand side will not evaluate. That's one of the shortcut the features of the AND operator, right, that we either evaluate the right-hand side or not based on the left-hand side. Right? So now if I go back, notice that the show bio is showing, but if I click on it, it disappears. Or see that? Okay. Which actually introduces a nice little feature, right? That say I want to be able to edit something, right? Say, here's my email. Here's my email. I might want to edit my email or not. Okay. So, for instance, what I like to be able to do is that here's my email as a span. It's my email. Showing either as an input field or as a value. And what I like to be able to do is, whether if I'm editing the email, then I want it to show as an input field. But if I'm not editing it, then I like it to show as just a plain value. Right? So for instance, I could have a checkbox here that I'm editing the email. Right? So for instance, this could be input, right? And I like to be able to keep track of whether I'm editing the email or not. Say maybe const editing email, then set editing email, new state. And at first it's maybe false. I'm not editing email. And so what I could do is show one or the other based on whether I'm editing or not, right? So let's see. Let's first have a checkbox here that is of type checkbox. Okay. And then the checked is equal to whether I am editing. Okay. And at first it's not checked. Okay. Okay. And so now what I'll do is that if I am editing the email, then I will show the input field. Right? Now, if I'm not editing the email, then I will show the span. Yeah. So now notice that it only displays one or the other. If I click on edit, oh, it's not working. Oh, I never handled it. Right. Here's the checkbox. Right. I need to actually change it. Oh wait, it's letting me editing email. What do I call it? Setting, yeah. And checkbox checked, and then on change, I would like to be able to set the editing email, right, to whether it's checked or not. Let's say set editing email to be e.target.checked. All right, let's see. Okay, notice that now, right? It has the it looks as if all of a sudden I have that text there, right? And when I click on it, right, it looks as if somehow I wrapped it around an input field, when in truth it's just I am, I'm swapping between two versions of the same thing, and this allows me to change it, right? You can say, so it's Alicia. You can say, okay. Notice that it changes and stays, right? Makes sense. Let's see, it's a question in the chat. Brian says that the frames per second might be not very good. Is that the other folks see that?
There are spots, but it's good right now.
So there are a few times that it's spotty.
I would say so. I think the audio as well sometimes cuts out, but right now you're good.
Okay. Well, thank you. All right, excellent. So let's keep going. Let's see. Let's do something a little more interesting. So we've done integers, right? We've done strings, booleans. So basically any data type. You can also do objects, right? So for instance, we have maybe a whole profile, right? And the profile would be an object that might have first name, last name, and all sorts of things, right? Where you have you say use state, right? And you initialize it as an object. That object might have first name, Alice, last name, Wonderland, right? Might have name, Alice 3, password. Right. So, okay. And so we would like to be able to maybe render that. So this is for and this would be objects, and try to separate. I like to be able to render Alice. Okay, objects. Is how do we do that? Well, first, let me show you something that might be useful for debugging. Oftentimes it's useful to just render the data raw on the screen just to see if things are working as you expected, versus it might be nice to render as a free is a tag in HTML that allows you to render things that are pre-formatted, right? That as it would appear maybe in the logs or messages, right? Or something that you actually type at a command line or something like that. And oftentimes we like to be able to render objects. So here you can put an expression. Now you cannot in React.js just print an object. Like for instance, I can't do profile. Profile is an object, right? It'll complain, right? It crashes, saying, oh, like that. Right? But you can convert this into a string, right? And JavaScript has a nice little string conversion from objects. So it's JSON called JSON.stringify, convert into string the following. Okay. And there it is. See that? That's the object, nicely formatted as a in a Courier or whatever font. You can also format this a little nicer so that it's maybe one. And, if this would be a really, really big object, it may be hard to read. Right? You can format a little bit more by giving it null and two being the number of spaces you want to format and add tabs and whatnot, spaces that you want. So there's 2 characters here, right? How much tabbing you want. So this is a nice little feature that allows you, for debugging purposes, great, right? See if your objects are actually defined in the fields and whatnot. So let's leave that there. So here, maybe we would want to have maybe several input fields that will allow you to modify each one of the fields and properties of that object. So you might say, you might have maybe first name, right, and maybe an input field that allows you to edit the input, the first name. Right? So, something this would be the value would be the profile dot the first name. So there's my Alice. There it is. And then I can add each one of these. So first name, last name, username. Okay. This would be last name, username, and password. That and password. There we go. And the type here, should be password. There we go. So there they are, right? And notice that I can't edit it, like you would expect. Can't change it. So how would we do this? How would we change this? So it's basically the same kind of strategy, right? As we type, so let's play around with the first name first. And so let's maybe put this in a separate line so that we see what we type. What we want to do is we want to say on change. Okay. Let's now it could get messy here because we are working with objects. So I'm going to actually call a function that only does the name, the first name, right? So I'm going to create a function here called const set first name, right? And as you would expect, I'm going to pass it the events, right? And I'm going to call it right here. Say set first name. Okay. And you would do what you would expect that you would say const new first name is the dot target dot value. Okay, so we have the new first name, and we need to be able to set this. So how do we do that? We want to be able to say set profile. What we want to, how do we set the profile? So profile, we want to be able to set only the first name. We don't want to just set all of them, right? All the other ones we don't want to change, right? we want to keep the same last name as before, same username, same password. Right? So we only want to change the first name. How do we do that? So what we could do is basically create maybe a copy of the object. I can say new profile would be what we want to do. We have to do something. We have to rebuild the profile. We would say, the first name will be the new first name, right? And the last name would be the same last name that you already had. It would be the old profile dot last name, and all the other ones, right? You can say username, profile. I want to keep the same username as before, right? And I want to leave the password as is. Profile dot password, and then I can set the new profile. Make sense? Yeah. Let's see if this works. So this is notice that I can change. Notice that my object is changing down below. So Alicia, notice that change. I can't change the last name or anything else. It makes total sense, right? But Alicia, I can change, right? And so that works. All right, so let's do another one. Let's do last name, right? Now, every time I go to the next example, I'm just pointing out, right, how actually easier it is than it looks. Okay, this was very convoluted, right? I had to create a profile, copy everything over, right, and then set the profile, which is very verbose, right? And it would be very inconvenient if I had to do this for every single field, right? Imagine I had 20 fields. I would have to create 20 objects or functions. That'd be absurd. Okay. So how do we improve on this? Okay. Well, let's improve it just a little bit. Still, let's do the last name just the same way, right? So that we're going to improve this on this just a little bit, and allow us to introduce a new syntax in JavaScript. So const set last name, same thing, right? It's almost the same thing. Get the event, okay? And we're going to pass it here. Let's say last name is our input field, our value, and we'll say on change. I'm going to call set last name. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to do the same thing we did here, right? We're going to grab the last name. So you const in the last name. E.target value. But check this out. For the new profile, right? To copy over all the fields, right? JavaScript has a nice syntax called the spreader, right? Which we briefly introduced last week. Right? You can do spreading with arrays. You can copy old arrays into new arrays, or you can copy entire objects. Right? So for instance, what I like to be able to do is just copy over all the values of profile, right? So they don't have to do it one by one. Say ... profile. So now new profile is a copy of the old profile, right? All right, so I can use this syntax like that. Okay. Plus, I can now override certain fields, right? So yes, I have copied over the first name, the last name, the username, the password, but I don't want the same last name. I want a new last name. And I can say the last name is equal to the new last name. See that? Okay, so that's much better. So that's much easier, right? So I would say set profile, right, is the new profile. Okay, so that's slightly better, especially if the profile had 20 fields, and I don't want to have to do all at once. So yeah, so let's see if that actually works. So yeah, I can do it, right? So wonderful. Okay. All right. How about doing this username? Let's do username slightly different. So check this out. You can actually do it right here, right, on the input field without leaving. Right. Actually, let's do use it. You can do this. We can say on change. We have the event, right? I can just use set profile right here without leaving my input field, right? It's an object whose value is going to be what? A copy of the old profile, right? But I am going to override the username, right? And maybe I can split this into that so it's easier to read. And then the username is just the event dot targets dot value. See that? Right, so without even leaving my input field, right? Without having to go and create a separate function, right? So I'm just copying over all the old profile, and then I'm overriding the username to be the next value. So I can change this right to 4. Everybody good? Make sense? And same thing with the password. I can do the same thing with the password. All right. All right. Excellent. So one of the question is well, how do we share this data maybe with other components, right? That's where things start to get messy, right? How is it that this started to get fairly complex, and this now a lot of information, and you must start thinking, oh, you know what, this is way too much, and so maybe I should put the email somewhere else. Maybe put it in a different component, right, and break this up into multiple things, right? So how do I do that? So let's take a look at this counter. This counter, right? So for instance, I could maybe split it up into another component, say the counter component. This is counter, right? And this would be component const counter, right? And I would like to be able to move this whole thing, right? Move it here. It says return, and maybe put a that and then counter right here, right? And then just do an export default counter, right? And then this, I'd like to just replace it with my new counter element. But there are certain things here that I don't have, right? I don't have count, I don't have up, down, email, count. I don't have any of that, right? All that is defined where? Up here. The state is maintained by this component. I need to somehow be able to share it with other elements, right? With this new element. So how do we do that? Well, we can pass it as an argument. You can pass it as an argument like count, right, comma, up, down, and so on and so forth, right? But it turns out that that's not the way it's done, right? It actually what you do it is by passing an object, right? We're going to collect all these values, count, up, down, blah, 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 into an object, into a map. And we're going to pass it to the counter, right? So we are going to receive an object, and from that object, we're going to pick out, the pieces of that object, and we're going to bind it to local variables. And there's a syntax in JavaScript to do just that. If you pass me an object, I'm going to pick out the fields in that object, and I'm going to declare variables of the same name, but are local, right? And that's the destructor. The destructor syntax does that for me. Right? So I can say, you're going to pass me count, email, up, and down. You pass me all those things. And there they are. Now I have these declarations. All right, what is this? This is just again, this syntax, it's just an object like that. Right? Oops. Right? It's a destructor, which you're passing me an object, and I'm picking out the fields of that object that it's passing me. Right? So how do we now I can replace this whole thing. Now I can replace this whole thing with the counter component, right? And I can pass each one of these elements count, up is up, down, oops, no comma. Down is down, and email is email. Good. And obviously, it's much easier to read stuff like that. you see, counter is now twice. See, here's my counter. Here's my counter again, right? With the email that I'm passing as an argument to, and it behaves the same way. Notice that it changes both places, right? Look at that. Okay. So what's happening here? Notice what's happening, right? The value count is being maintained here in the set in this state variable, which is being shared in two different places. It's being shared locally, right? The local count, but it's being also shared with another component, right, that I'm passing a reference to. I'm also passing, check this out, I'm passing a reference to the functions. These are functions that live here in this component, and I'm passing it down as an argument, right, to my counter. So these onclicks are calling, right, these functions that are bound to the same function that are these bounds here in the local component, right? So as I go there, it's this up here, up function right there, and the down. Okay. Question in the chat. Okay. You're still with me? All right. Okay. So now I don't really need this counter local one, right? I can just blow this way, right? And actually I can have any number of counters, right? All sharing the same value. Okay, see that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody's sharing the same state across multiple components, right? And I'm sending them to them for them to be able to share. And they're all updating the same exact state. Everybody good? And I can do the same thing with all of these, right? So this is email, right? Maybe I can have an email up here, say JavaScript email. This is a constant email, right? That I can copy this, right? Copy that, and this just says return. Paste that in there, and then export false email. Now the things that I depend on here are, all these other stuff, right? I need this function, right? I need this editing email, change email, all those stuff, right? I am depending on those things. I pass them in as arguments, right? Say here, it's a good practice to put every single dependency in each line. So for instance, I need set editing email here. Okay? I need editing email too. Pass it as argument. I need the email here. Okay? And change email here. What else? Email. I think that's all I need. Okay. So now here I can just replace this. I can just replace this whole thing with an email component that I need to bind all the attributes. Right? Email is bound to the local email, and change email is bound to the local change email function. Careful, it's just a function. Then editing email is bound to the local editing email variable, state variable. Okay. And finally, set email is another function. Set email. Careful, just a function. I don't want to call the function. And where's the email? There it is. My email works just the same, right? I can edit it. Right. Notice that it notifies everybody else, and it's right. All the other counter, right, who are listening for that email also get notified, and everybody renders, which is pretty cool, right? Okay. All right, so I can go on and replace all these. Right? Okay. Now the problem with this approach, right, as magical as it might seem, it starts to be when these components get fairly complex, right? So for instance, if you have these profiles, right? Say I want to do the same thing, but with the object, right? Same thing, right? I could pass in and whatnot. It'll work just the same way. Perfect, yeah, right? But say I had an array of elements, right? And each element, as I'm iterating, has its own component. Each component has its own little thing, right? So now the dependency we have right now is that we have one parent and then a direct child, right? This component is the parent of the email, and this component is the parent of this counter, which is fine. It's fairly simple, right? But what if counter was also complex, and I needed to break this out into even smaller components, right? Now I have a three-way hierarchy or four-way hierarchy, right? And you might have a function, at the top of the component, of the parent, that is being passed into more and more deeper components down below, right? So now you have this communication back and forth between not only between the parent and child, but the great grandparent with the great parent with the grandparent with the parent, the child, grandchild, grandchild. So you have this back and forth communication that gets fairly complex. So ideally, we would want a mechanism where perhaps we could, within these components, we could declare a context that they can all share amongst themselves, right? Without having to drill up and down, right? The component hierarchy, right? Where they all share the profile objects, right? And they can all pick out this localized global state, right? That instead of having to go up and down the ladder of hierarchy. Does that make sense? Okay. And that's where state for the application starts to come in, right? That we don't want to only maintain state within a component and maybe perhaps share some of the state with lower components, back and forth. I want to have something much bigger, right? That's shared across, any number of components. Okay, so let's play with that. Okay, all right. Let's see. Well, let me create here another directory, and this will be state application state. Okay. And by application state, I mean, a state that is not confined with a small subset of maybe a component or maybe a small subset, but I mean a state that is so important that most components will want to know, right? For instance, it would be very common that each component might want to know who's the current logged in user. That might be information that is widely interesting to all sorts of components across your entire application. Is the person logged in, right? Who are they? Okay, and so that information might want to live in an application state. So how do we do that? Okay. So the way we're going to do it is as follows, right? We're going to have to break out somehow the data out of the component, so that the state or the data is no longer declared, right, at the component level. Instead, we need to be able to declare it elsewhere, right, at a higher hierarchy. And then, but still, I need to be able to, at the component, at anywhere in the hierarchy, I need to be able to pull that data, right, without going through my parent, my great grandparent, my blah blah blah, all the way up, right? I need to just declare it, in this magical place, and I want to be able to just pluck out the value. Okay, so how do we do that? Okay, so let's create here a component where we are going to do just that. So we're going to create here the index where we are going to play around with the application state. Response application state. All right, and it's going to return. This is CH3 maybe. Application state. This is export all. So let's let me put that in the index here, and this is component state, and this is application state. All right. Okay, so we have component state down here, and we have application state up here. Okay. All right. So how do we do this? So we want to have maybe things such as the current user. Right? So we want to be able to have a place where we have the data of the current user. So we'll do here, we'll create current user. And this would have information about the current user. So for instance, I might have an initial state of the current user, initial state. And it might be an object that says who the current state user is. This might be the first name of that user, right? Same thing like Alex. Oh, who's Bob? And last name. Oh, okay, and maybe username. Bob. Okay, let's leave that. And then now also this data needs to change over time, right? And so how do we do that? We want this information to change over time. So it can't just be a JSON file that has static value. It needs to be able to be calculated over time as we interact with it, right? So what we do is that we're going to create a function that is going to calculate that for me, right? And that function is going to take into account all sorts of events and actions, and based on that actions and events, it's going to reduce all those actions and events into a value that is calculated and gives it to me, right? So this is going to be a reducer, right? That reduces all these events and actions and it calculates a new value, right? So it's going to be the current user reducer, right? It's going to be a function that is going to, for now, it's going to return the initial state. Okay, and we're going to export default current user. Okay, so this is providing the value, right? And it's going to be able to take in, and it's going to calculate the value. Right now, it's constant, right? It's always initial state. So somehow that needs to be made available to some component that renders this, right? Maybe the profile screen, okay? Maybe a profile screen wants to render this. So this might be the profile screen. So this would be the profile screen. And so the profile screen wants to render the current user. And so it wants to do return, wants to render, call this h4, is the profile screen. So export this default profile screen. And my index here is going to render the profile screen. Right? Right now it's not doing it. It just shows profile. Maybe we should say profile screen. Okay. So how does a profile screen pull information from our reducer? Right. Basically, it wants to render that. Right. So somehow it needs to call this function, and then this function is going to give it to us. But not just us. We want this data available for everybody, right? Not only the profile screen, but maybe also in some other, maybe the billing screen, where we're buying something. You might have a checkout screen, you have a billing and address, right? That might also want to know who's currently logged in, right? So that I know who I'm going to charge, right? So you might have here the billing screen also wants to know, right, who's currently logged in. So how do we share data so that everybody gets the value, right? So how do we do that? Okay, we already know that we could pass it we know that we could pass it as an argument. That's what we learned in the component state, right? Somehow we pass in the value as an argument, and then you just get the value, right, through the argument. But that's what we don't want to do. That's exactly what we're trying to stop doing, right? We do not want to create a dependency between parents, child, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, right? Because, again, we're going to find our way having to go back and forth. To want to stop doing that. So, but nevertheless, I need that information, right? So how do I do that? How do I grab that? So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a technology called Redux to do that. So we have the profile screen, I have the billing screen, right? And both of them want the currently logged in user. Right? So how do we do that? So the way we do that is that we're going to bring in the reducer. Bring in the reducer. So this is the current. What I call that? Current user reducer. Oh. So current user reducer. There it is. From current user. Yeah. And we want to be able to provide this data to all these guys, right? So I'm going to import from Redux, which I haven't installed yet. You can install this libraries. So Redux is a library that allows me to grab global data and provide it to any number of components all at once, right? And then components can then pluck out what they want from there, right? So let's install the library. So this is npm install Redux. There's actually 3 libraries, but today we're going to look at 2. And then later this week, we're going to look at a 3rd library, which is going to simplify a couple of things. Right? Okay, we did that, and let's do React Redux. React Redux. So the Redux library is the core library that is going to allow to do this, right? Of share the data across multiple components. And it's not a React-based library. Right? It's not specific to React, right? You could actually use it with Angular. You could use it with any number of other libraries, even jQuery. But the React Redux library is specific. It has bindings that allow us to specifically use it for React. Okay, right, so we have that. Okay, so we're going to provide provider. And that's in the React Redux. And we're going to provide the data storage, the data that has been stored in a store. All right, we're going to provide that data to all the components. So we need to create the store. We're going to import create store. All right. Notice that it has a slash across it. See that? All right. It has been deprecated, but it's still widely used, right, in the React world, in the Redux world. So I'm going to teach you today this legacy way of doing it. When we come back on Wednesday, I'll show you the new syntax using the React toolkit. Okay, but this is still widely used, and you still need to know and follow and understand the syntax, right? So I'm going to teach you to say this wizard. Sure, not just that, not just 1 minute. let me finish this up. Yo. So I'm going to create the store with the reducer as follows. I'm going to say const use the store. I'm going to create the store with the reducer. Okay. And from the reducer, and then I then can provide that as follows. I can say provide the store to all the elements that are in my belly, inside of my body. Right? Everybody's going to be able to pluck the values they want from the store, right? The profile screen, the billing screen, right? They're all going to be able to grab that data from here, right? From the provider, from the store. And so now the provider can pluck out that information as follows, right? They can select from the store the information that is in there, which is the current user. So I can say const current user. I can pluck out, I can use select for, like I can select data. All the data is being injected to all the components from this provider and is being provided to us through a function call from which we can pluck out what we want. Right now, there's only one thing in there, right? The current user. Okay. So here's our user, and I'm just going to return the user. Okay. And here, I can then display the user first name. Okay. Oh, actually, sorry. Sorry, state. And user, where's user? Oh, sorry, current user. There it is. There's Bob. Look at that. See that? The first name, and it's also available in the billing screen. I can do the same thing. I can pluck out the user. I can call it whatever I want. I can pluck out from the. I can select from the data that is in there, which is right now the only thing in there is the user. That's all there is, right? And I have information here. I can pluck out the user. Last name. Oops. And there it is. The billing screen has information about the last name. I can pluck out the whole object, right? Again, I can print out the entire user, right? Let's say JSON.stringify the whole user object. Here it is. Right? It's also available, obviously, in the profile. There it is. So both of them have it. It's called current user. So they both have the information. See that? It's available across the entire application without having to pass it as an argument. See that? Okay. You use the use selector to extract whatever you need from whatever you put in the reducer. Right now, what do we put in the reducer? In the store, sorry, what do we put in the store? Well, whatever the current user reducer returns. It is what this create store does is that it invokes the function of the current user, and whatever it returns, puts it in the store, and then that data in the store is then shared amongst all the components that want the data globally. And then they use the selector hook, right, to extract the parts that they want. Right now, there's only one part. Right, there's only one part. Right, it just has this object. You can combine multiple reducers, right, for different purposes. Now you want to have maybe a reducer for the currently logged in user, another reducer for the shopping cart, or another reducer has my favorite items. Right? So each reducer can maintain its own state, right? And it can change over time. And as it changes over time, you can pluck out the parts that you need without dependency. That's very important. Okay, notice that there's no need for any dependency. I can, for instance, I can use this. I can put here in the billing screen, nested inside of the profile. Do that. So we have the profile screen with the billing screen nested inside of the profile screen. I could put it anywhere I want in the component tree. It doesn't matter, right? Because there is no dependency between the parent and the child. Right? It's grabbing the data from this global space, right? That is the application. Make sense? Right? Let's see. Actually, in the chat. All right. Yeah. So that's the introduction to Redux. Redux allows you to do these data maintenance, right, and split it up. Let's do a couple of other examples. Let's see. That's the current user. That's my reducer. And let's maybe have a tweet reducer. Right? This tweets. Reducer. Right? That's a naming convention. Right? The functions that return data from this data set, right, are referred to as reducers. Right? So here's my tweets reducer. Again, it's a function that is going to return an initial set of tweets. So then this could be in a JSON file, whatnot, right? This could be an object, an array of objects, and tweet one. Right? You can make several tweets. For right, so please 2, 3, 4. And right now, right, this just returns tweets. And this export default tweets reducer. Okay, that. And then from the application store, right, I can load that reducer. So import tweets reducer. Okay. And I want to be able to combine now this reducer with the tweets reducer. Now they're going to be combined. Now my object, my user object, my current user object won't be the only thing in there. Right? Now I'm going to have to share the space in the store with other things, right? Not only my current user, but now some tweets, right? People that are following me, right? All my likes, right? So now I need to create a map. I need to create a master reducer that combines multiple reducers. Right? So there is a combine reducers function that allows me to combine multiple reducers. So combine reducers, and this takes a map so that you can later on say, hey, give me the data that comes from that reducer, or give me the data that comes from that other reducer, right? And you can name them. Right? So for instance, I can say the current user, right, is going to have the reducer, the current user reducer is going to generate data, and it's going to be available in this namespace, right? So each one of the data is being fed into the overall reducer, the master reducer, and it's going to have data from multiple reducers, right? And we have to namespace them. And here's tweets. It's going from the tweets reducer. Now that we have that map, we can feed that instead of having one reducer. Now we have a combined set of reducers. They paste it in there, master reducer. Right. This is going to break the current billing and profile screen. Right. It's gonna break it. Where is it? Refresh. Oh, it didn't break it. Oh. It should break it. Why is it not breaking? Store, blah, 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 blah. Profile screen. Okay, so this now, right, this object that's coming in here actually is not just the current user. It used to be just the current user. Now is inside of a bigger object that contains the current user. Right, so this would be state dot, right, this name here. Current user. Oh, okay, that's what's rendering. It's rendering that. Okay, yeah. It was rendering the object that's in there. So this is state.current user, and then we pluck out the value. Same thing with building screen. We do the same thing. There's data dot current user. And there it is, Bob, and like we're before. See that? But now we can create another component that can pluck out the tweets, right? So this could be JavaScript tweets component, right? Const tweets tweets, and pluck out the tweets, right? So it's 3 tweets from the store. So these are the tweets. It's going to use selector from the state, from the overall object. There's one called tweets, so state.tweets. And then we can render this. This group. And iterate on the tweets. Dot map render as line items. This group item. This is the export all tweets and render it in the application state. We'll render it here top. This is tweets. Did I not export it? Tweets? I did, right? Tweets. Okay, that. Did it find it? Did it import it? It didn't. Huh? Why did it import it? Import it, yeah. Weird that it didn't import it. Anyway, so notice that there we are. Here's the tweets, right? That were plucked out, right, from the reducer, right, the master reducer. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So would you create a database query and wrap the response in the Redux reducer to bring the data from the state where you needed it? Wait, why do we call it reducer? Yeah, so reducer is it's a function that reduces a fairly complex data structure and plucks out the parts that need passing through the transformation, right? Something that might be fairly hierarchical and lots of branches, if not, converts it maybe into an array of 4 items, right? And you know, this it's basically applying a function that calculates over a data structure, right? That visits all the nodes in a very complex data structure, right? And then it transforms it into some other representation. Okay? So in our case, it's you know, each reducer or each data structure we have an array of tweets, profiles, we have shopping cart, we have all this stuff, right? That's being combined into a huge object, right? And then each reducer gets a chance to visit this very complex data structure, right? And then calculate what it is that we want to extract. Right now, the calculation is fairly trivial, right? It's just, you know, comes back with a value. It's not calculating anything, right? Our reducers are fairly dumb, right? The only thing that they do is just return the data. But as we'll see later on Wednesday, we'll come back to this, right? And depending on state changes, and we'll implement a finite state machine, right? That depending on the state and what the events are, it will create or will calculate a new slices of this data, right? We'll slice it in multiple different ways. So would you create a database query and wrap the response in a Redux reducer to bring that data into state where you needed it. I'm not sure if you, Brian, I'm not sure if you're referring to extracting data from a remote data set that you're retrieving from some server. I mean,
yeah. So say you have a query you need to run on a user object on some, whatever arbitrary object you want it to be. You initiate an API call against the database.
Oh.
You have a response object. You then map through the response object, map the associated, fields to the data,
right.
Stick them in a given structure. In this case, we're using reducer. That's just a term, which, I fully realize we can call that whatever we need to. Whatever transform we need to do on the data object that comes
yes.
out from the API,
right.
then you hold that in the state, pass it to the component as necessary.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank
you. What could just be a term? Okay. Yeah. So now the syntax that we have looked at today is still widely used. Right now Redux is transitioning to a syntax that is slightly easier, and so I'm not going to dwell too much in this current syntax because again we're moving away from this older syntax. So on Wednesday I'm going to focus on the newer syntax using Toolkit, okay, which makes the use of Redux much easier. It removes a lot of the boilerplate stuff that you have to write, and the older syntax not forces you, but it's good practice to break out different artifacts into different directories, so it spreads it out until you have to deal with 3-4 different directories. So this new syntax that we'll cover on Wednesday avoids all that complexity and simplifies quite a bit. So that's what we're going to be covering on Wednesday. This stays almost identical, right? On both different syntax, we will make the change that we're not going to be using combine reducers or create store anymore. Instead, we're going to do configure. I haven't installed it. I haven't installed the library. We'll install it on Wednesday, and we'll use a configure store, right? That uses almost the same syntax, but it just creates a lot of great stuff that is already implemented for us without us having to do much from scratch. Okay. Anyway, that's on Wednesday. Any questions? All right, excellent. Thank you, everyone. Oh, Yo-Yo?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I missed the quiz 3.
I believe I unlocked it. Can you check?
Yeah, let's see.